live streaming now, so don't say anything dumb.
Yeah, sorry guys, it's raining for me. You can mute me if you want.
Nick,
It's
where
I
do
will,
you
don't
live?
worry.
What state do you live in, buddy?
Like Georgia or something. Hold up, let me put the other stuff in the waiting room.
Okay.
Bro, I ran a whole woman.
Yeah.
That was an insult.
Eric. Average collectivist anarchist.
I'm a collectivist. Man,
Same.
why is Mustafa typing? I don't want to see this kid's words.
Okay, buddy. Here, ready? Tell me if you guys like my what up? I'm gonna do my picture for the Zoom. You guys like the image?
Oh, he has a thing in defense of free movement. That's interesting.
Oh shit! How do I make myself not the spotlight anymore?
I got you, don't worry. You're not
I'll
that
make it.
important,
I'll make
buddy.
it Specify.
Wait, what the hell? View gal. Okay, is that better?
I'm in an interview right now.
Oh, when is that?
Right now.
Okay, after you're done with that, you want to play?
Yeah, you should join the interview though.
Okay, can you send me the code?
It's in the Discord and the server announcements.
Okay, I will join right now.
Bye, Chloe.
Bye.
Are we live? Oh.
Yeah. Oh. Who's the divinity guy? Probably a fucking loser.
Who's in the? Someone in the waiting room?
Expected to make it yourself?
Huh? What?
You're the spotlight, bro. Hold up.
I am? Hold up.
Yeah. Oh, unless I'm just stupid. Never mind. I'm just dumb. Never mind.
Wait.
What's up? Who said what's up?
Okay, hold up.
Okay. Then we should
Wait,
give out the
announce
best
it.
impression.
Announce it.
I suck his dick with a smile for hours at a time.
Wait, announce it, bro.
Okay. I'm gonna at everybody again. At.
Do you want? Hold on. I'll type it out. Don't write anything. Oh, he's here. He's here. He's here.
Oh shit. Let him in.
Hold up. He just. Okay. He should be spotlighted now. Now we
Yeah.
should have people coming in. I'm gonna DM Dan man here.
Oh my god, what is his name, bro? Okay, Spec, you're gonna have to regulate people being dumb. Okay. I'll keep a eye on it too. But
Hold up. Let me ask Huemer to unmute. Or did you already do that? Oh, there he is.
oh yeah, let me get him to unmute.
Okay, yeah.
You
I
can.
asked him.
Okay, dope. Very nice. Now I just wait for people to join. Fantastic.
Okay. Devin, do you want to read off the opening thing, or should I?
You can do it.
Alright, hold on, let me pull it up. Do you want? Okay, hold on, let me admit that person. Okay, so this is Professor Hume, if you want to say a few words before we begin, that'd be.
Hi, I'm Professor Huemer from the philosophy department at the University of Colorado. I've written some books. If you've heard of me, it's probably because of my book, The Problem of Political Authority, which is, a big libertarian philosophical defense. And yeah, I'm here to answer any questions, I guess.
Yeah. So wait, Liam, do you want to give the first question, or should I?
I'll get the first question. That's fine.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, what would you say is your case against vegetarianism and for veganism?
Oh, the thing is that the arguments for being a vegetarian are basically all arguments for being vegan, right? So, I mean, the main reason why people would give up meat is because of animal welfare reasons. And, you know, the dairy cows are treated about as badly as, you know, any animals. So, I mean, right. So if the question is, oh, should we be eating eggs and dairy? Well, you know, they're like torturing the chickens and cows. So like if you care about that, then, you know, you would give up all animal products.
Okay, yeah. So I guess as an extension of question one, from the libertarian perspective, would you justify like animals being some form of self-owner, or like how would you go about like giving some form of moral agency or consideration to animals?
Yeah, I mean, there's two reasonable views, right? So like some people believe in animal rights. There's no general agreement. So even among just conventional ethicists, there's no general agreement on a theory of rights. We don't have an agreement on like why people have rights or even if they do. So it's difficult to say whether animals should have rights too. The other reasonable perspective is, well, maybe we should take a utilitarian approach to animals, i.e., you know, don't cause harm that's greater than the benefit. And but you know, on either of these views, they have very similar practical implications, because in fact, what we're doing is causing vastly more harm, right? Just, you know, enormous amounts of harm and suffering to other creatures for trivial benefits for ourselves, which is just, you know, like not okay on either view, right? Whether they have rights or not. So, I mean, I don't try to say whether animals have rights or not, right? Because I don't even really know why people have rights.
Okay. Spec, you ask the next question.
Yeah, sure. So I saw that you had some works on meta ethics, specifically ethical intuitionism. So just what your thoughts were on moral error theory, especially in light of your recent works concerning ethical intuitionism.
Yeah, moral error theory is an error. Yeah, what's my problem with it? It implies that there's nothing wrong with torturing babies for fun. And I think that's absurd. I think that that's more implausible than like anything else that I can think of, right? So like, I think in order to justify the error theory, you would have to have some amazing evidence. You'd have to have like an amazing argument for it that was more plausible to start with than the premise that, you know, you shouldn't torture babies for fun. And I just don't know how they're going to come up with some premise that's more obvious than that, right? When you look at the actual arguments that they've given, they're not even close, right? So actual arguments for error theory include very prominently things like only desires can motivate action. If there are moral properties, then beliefs about them would motivate action independent of desires. So there can't be any moral properties or something like that, right? I find both of those premises highly dubious. And they're certainly not more obvious than the premise that you shouldn't torture babies for fun and things like that.
So you don't think there's anything that overrides the intuition that moral error theory is false?
No, right? So,
Okay.
so I mean, there are arguments, but they're all kind of like that. They're like the, you know, example that I gave. They all have very dubious premises.
Okay. Divinity, I don't know if you want to ask the next question. Go.
Yeah, sure. What path led you to the conclusion of libertarianism from a political philosophy perspective?
Well, I mean, if you want to know about the actual history, like I was in college, a bunch of people recommended that I should read Ayn Rand. Or like, you know, when the third person said that I should read The Fountainhead or something like that, I said, okay, fine, I'll read it. And then, you know, then I read the rest of her works. So like that was sort of what caused me to get into libertarianism to begin with. Also, when I was in college at UC Berkeley, I met Brian Kaplan, who, you know, now is a famous libertarian anarchist economist, and he introduced me to anarchism. So he sort of like pushed me the rest of the way to my now currently radical libertarian view. But you know, like if you ask, well, how do I argue for libertarianism? Like what justification do I give? I like the argument in my book is, well, I just don't see the basis for the government's authority. So, you know, libertarian views just result from applying the same moral principles to the state that everybody else already applies to everyone other than the state. So you should be a libertarian unless you can think of a reason why the state is special and should get to do things that nobody else is allowed to do. And it just happens that, you know, there's no good explanation of that.
Okay, so would you consider yourself like an anarcho-capitalist or an ANCAP?
I am an anarcho-capitalist.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I defended that in the second part of the problem of
Yeah.
political authority.
Spec, you can ask the next question.
Sure. So just another meta ethics question. This one on cognitivism. So would you say, or I guess, what's the ethical intuitionist view on how, or the ethical intuitionist justification for cognitivism?
Oh, I mean, I think, okay, so, you know, in case anybody doesn't know, the issue is whether moral statements are expressing propositions or not. So like when you say abortion is wrong, is that saying something that's either true or false, right? Like making a factual claim or something like that? Or is it just expressing your negative feelings about abortion, or like just trying to control other people's behavior, but not making a statement about something that could be true? Okay, that's the issue, right? So, and like, I think the best argument is, there are certain linguistic contexts in which you can embed a proposition asserting phrase in a larger sentence. So like you could say, if P, then Q, and you insert P, for P, you insert something that expresses a proposition, right? Like, if the sky is blue, then something else, right? Okay, and you can't insert something that isn't a proposition for P. So you can't say, if shut the door, then something. It just doesn't make sense. Or if out, then such and such, okay? So like that's a test for whether a sentence expresses a proposition or not. And that's not the only one. There's like many, many expressions in our language that are like that, where you have to plug in a proposition or it doesn't make sense. Like, I wonder whether blank. What goes in the blank has to be a proposition expressing phrase. Right? Or John believes that blank. Is it true that blank? It's possible that, okay? And there's just a whole bunch of these things where you have to put in the proposition. Okay, so here's the thing. Every single one of those works with moral sentences, right? And they don't work with anything that's uncontroversially non-propositional. Right, so like some people claim that moral sentences don't express propositions, but we have a bunch of sentences that everyone agrees don't express propositions, and none of them work in those contexts, right? So like, I wonder whether ouch doesn't work, right? It doesn't make sense, okay? And they all work if you put some moral sentence like abortion is wrong, right? So that shows that moral sentences are in fact expressing propositions. They're not just like emotional expressions like hooray and boo.
Okay. Do you have, I guess, in a defense of cognitivism, do you have any critiques of like the quasi-realist position on for the non-cog side?
I mean, it's just sort of the same thing, right? So like what Simon Blackburn does is he takes a few of these contexts and tries to explain what they would mean with a moral sentence. So like, it's true that abortion is wrong. He explains that, well, that actually just means abortion is wrong. So that's just like re-explain it. It's just another way of expressing the same emotion, that abortion is wrong expressed. So, okay, I believe that abortion is wrong. Yeah, that's just expressing the same emotion or something like that. Okay, but then you have to get more complicated to explain things like if abortion is wrong, then fetuses are people. Right, but so then he has some weird thing where it's like, oh, you're expressing a disapproval of a combination of attitudes in which somebody would disapprove of abortion but not believe that fetuses are people. or something like that. Okay, but what you notice is, so that's not what if then normally means, at least not on most accounts. So what you have to do is you have to claim that there's an ambiguity in the word if and the word true and the word believe and the word possible and every single expression in the language that can be used to embed a proposition. You have to claim that it has an ambiguity that bizarrely, coincidentally enables you to apply it to a moral sentence, even though that doesn't express a proposition, but doesn't allow you to apply it to anything that uncontroversially fails to express a proposition, right? So that is a possible position. That's basically what the non-cognitivists have to say. That's a possible position. It's not a contradiction, right? But I just think like it's unmotivated. And, you know, I mean, I think this is like an example of why philosophy doesn't make progress, right? The willingness to say stuff like that.
Yeah, I would agree. Spec, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, sure. So, this is a question on objectivism and their epistemology. So, objectivists have several critiques of rationalism. I'm sure you've seen them since you said you read Rand's works in college. So, what would you say are your defenses of rationalism from the objectivist epistemology?
Yeah, I mean, so we should think about what rationalism is. So the traditional rationalist philosophers, I think, they made a key mistake, which is sort of thinking that most learning is top down, that you start from abstract general principles and then deduce stuff from it. And that's not normally the way people learn. And that's not a good way to proceed in almost all areas, right? In almost all areas, the best way to proceed, practically speaking, is sort of bottom up, like starting with a lot of examples and trying to draw generalizations, not starting with generalizations and trying to deduce things, okay? However, you know, the empiricists are also mistaken in thinking that, you know, all knowledge is based on observation, right? So yeah, why do I think all knowledge isn't based on observation? There's just a bunch of examples. So I think no object can be completely green and completely blue at the same time. So, and I think I know that a priori. Why do I think that's a priori? Well, so take any observation that I make. If that observation is false, I still know that nothing can be completely blue and completely green, right? In fact, even if all of my observations that I've ever made have been mistaken, so that's highly improbable, right? But it is possible. It is highly improbable, but possible that every observation I've ever made has been an hallucination. If that's true, still nothing can be completely green and completely blue at the same time, right? And I know that, right? So that shows that it's a priori. That is, so that shows that it's not justified by observation, because I know that even if my observations are false, it's still true. You see what I mean?
Spec.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, because these things are a priori, and Rand rejects the existence of the a priori, that would be contention with her epistemology. You can ask the next question.
Well, I guess as as another question, do you agree with Kant on the existence of synthetic a priori knowledge, or do you think that a priori knowledge must be analytic?
Yeah, I agree that there is synthetic a priori knowledge. So that example I gave is supposed to be an example of it. So nothing is completely green and completely blue at the same time. I think that's synthetic a priori. I don't agree with Kant about the explanation for that. Like, I think his explanation totally doesn't explain it, and there's no reason for believing it, right? His explanation is like, it's all somehow, you know, dependent on the mind, dependent on our way of perceiving things.
Okay. Let's see where's the next question? Okay. So what are your critiques of compatibilism and your rejection for it, and your rejection of it for libertarian free will?
Yeah, the problem with compatibilism, so there's a sort of, you know, famous standard argument known as the consequence argument. which is, it's something like this. If determinism is true, then everything that happened, including my actions, is the consequence of stuff that happened in the remote past and the laws of nature. But I don't have any choice about what happened before I was born, and I don't have any choice about the laws of nature either. So it looks like it would follow that I don't have any choice about anything that happens, including my own actions. Here's an illustration. So suppose, we're having this debate about, how are we going to stop global warming? And let's say that this scientist comes and testifies before Congress and says, well, basically, in order to stop any further global warming, we would have to have stopped CO2 emissions 40 years ago. By the way, that's actually true. It takes like 40 years for the CO2 to get into the upper atmosphere to have its peak effect, right? So if we actually wanted to stop global warming, we would have to have done it 40 years ago. Okay, we did not in fact do so. Now, consider this inference. So therefore, we can't stop further global warming. Sound valid? So that's obviously valid, right? So in order for us to do something now, something would have to have happened in the past that did not in fact happen. So we can't do that thing. So that's a valid inference. Seems valid. If that's valid, that means that your ability to do otherwise is incompatible with your action being determined by something in the past. You see what I mean? So if determinism is true, then in order for me to do something different from what I actually do, stuff would have to have happened in the past that didn't in fact happen. Because that's kind of what determinism means, right? Like according to determinism, everything they do is determined by stuff that happened in the past. So past would have to have been different. And it wasn't different from what it was. So I can't do anything different. And it's usually thought that for you to have free will, there have to be multiple things that you can do. So it would follow that we wouldn't have free will.
Okay. So I guess what are your thoughts on, I guess, like classical compatibilism, on the idea that they tried justifying some form of free will in that it's not based off of the idea that you're making choices free of some form of like material constraint or like natural law, but that it's free because your desires and your motivations led to this action happening. And so because that action came from you and it came from your desires, that action is free.
Yeah, I see where they're coming from. And like every time you try to give a clear explanation of what freedom is, it's a compatibilist theory, right? But that doesn't really answer the argument, right? So, you can claim that an action is free if it results from your desires. That's not obviously true, because it looks like there's a possible exception, which is if your desires are determined by factors outside your control, and then those desires in turn determine your actions. Like, it's not obvious that that counts as being free, right? So like, how would we resolve that? Well, like I just gave that argument about the if your actions are determined by stuff that happened in the past, then they're not free, right? And it just seems to me like, so like the premises of that argument are plausible and more obvious than the claim that, you're free as long as your own desires determine your action, right? Like that's sort of, not obviously false, but not obviously true either when you consider the fact that your desires could have been determined by something else that's outside your control, right?
Okay. Spec, do you want to have the next question?
Yeah, sure. So, you have a piece on the problem of induction and your beginnings for an outline of the solution to it. What would you say are your um, not so much contentions with the problem of induction, but your thoughts on the previous attempts to get around the problem of induction, like by Kant, and whether or not you think and what your way of getting around the problem of induction is?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a big question because, there's multiple different previous responses to the problem, and also because my response is a little complicated. So anyway, what's wrong with Kant? As far as I can tell, he totally didn't address it at all, right? So, okay, so he proposes that we have synthetic a priori knowledge. Great. How's that going to help? Are we going to have synthetic a priori knowledge of, the inductive conclusions? So no. Maybe there's like a principle of induction that we could have synthetic a priori knowledge of. Okay, so that would actually answer the problem, which is what Bertrand Russell said, but that's not what Kant says, right? He says like, well, we know the law of causality a priori. So say that's true, that doesn't help you with the problem of induction, because the problem wasn't like knowing that there are causal laws. The problem was knowing what the causal laws are. Right? So like, you observe a bunch of white swans, and you're going to make this generalization, all swans are white. And you're like, how am I going to make this generalization? Then somebody tells you, well, every change has a cause. So what? That doesn't tell me whether all swans are white or not, right? Anyway, the other part of your question, like, what's my response to it? My response is sort of Bayesian and sort of inference to the best explanation, right? So the best explanation for why we see a bunch of regularities is that there are causal laws. And if you see a particular regularity, it becomes plausible that there's a causal law, about that particular regularity. And like, why is that justified? Well, you can just like give Bayesian reasoning. So if you start from some prior probabilities which are roughly indifferent among different possible causal laws, and then you observe regularities that are consistent with, some possible versions of the causal laws and not others, then you can confirm conclusions about what the causal laws are. So like, that's a very short version.
Spec.
Yeah. I think that answers my question. Do you want to get the next question or
Yeah.
Evan?
So what are your thoughts on Misesian praxeology, and more specifically, do you think it could be falsified?
I don't know, because like, I haven't studied it, so I don't know.
Okay.
It's like, I think it's not supposed to be falsifiable, right? I think it's supposed to be a priori.
Okay. Yuri asks, I'm trying to get into philosophy and I know you have a lot of experience in it. What are some books you would recommend starting with?
Oh, I don't know, like, if it's really starting, I recommend, okay, wait, I have a really good book, which is right here. I wrote, wait, okay. Oh, it's disappearing. Okay, wait. Anyway, I wrote an introduction to philosophy called Knowledge, Reality, and Value. Read that. And the rest of my books. Before I wrote that, I recommended to people Bertrand Russell's The Problems of Philosophy. Because, it's like, it's a good, short, clear introduction to mostly some problems in epistemology, actually, but, that's good. Like, it doesn't cover ethics and stuff. Like, I have some favorite philosophers, but I don't know that this is a good answer to this question, because it was like, what do you start with? But, I like John Searle and I like David Stove. If you like my writing, you probably won't hate those people either. Also, I like Robert Nozick. And because I find all of these people to be clear and frequently funny and entertaining philosophers.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on theism, and what would you say the best argument for the proof of the existence of God is?
Okay, wait, hold on a second. Wait, sorry. Say the first part of that again.
What are your thoughts on theism?
Yeah. Let's see. So I reject traditional religions. I don't know whether the world has a creator. I'm sure that if it does have a creator, he did not say all the stuff that's in the Bible or the Quran or any of the traditional world religions. because a bunch of that is crazy. So what's the best argument for? So, I mean, wait, we should first say something about like what counts as theism. So like, I don't think that there could be an omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent world creator, but there could be a world creator. Right? So there could be a creator of the world, but I don't think it could be omnipotent and probably not omniscient either because of my particular views about infinity. But anyway, the best argument for there being a creator, I think, is the fine-tuning argument. So, so basically, like there's a big mystery about why we're here and why all of the stuff around us is here. And like maybe most people don't appreciate how this is a big mystery, or maybe it's not obvious that this is mysterious, but it's mysterious in view of how incredibly improbable it is, right? So like there's a bunch of things that had to go just right. And in particular, there are sort of parameters of the universe, like things like the gravitational constant or the mass of the proton or the ratio of the gravitational to the electromagnetic force, all right? A bunch of these kind of fundamental physical parameters of the universe, a bunch of them had to be they had to be within certain very narrow ranges of possible values in order for life to be possible at all. So there shouldn't be life, right? Or basically it's like, it's weird that there's life. One of the biggest examples of fine tuning, and I get this from Roger Penrose, is the initial entropy of the universe. Right. So like, as you might know from thermodynamics, entropy is constantly increasing, and basically everything we do, all of our activities increase entropy. And like, we have to sort of rely on the order previously existing, and we sort of like decrease the amount of order in the universe whenever we try to accomplish anything useful. Right? So it's required by life existing at all that the universe started out in super low entropy, right? And so basically at the time of the Big Bang, the universe started in a ridiculously low entropy state, right? Which according to Roger Penrose has a probability of like 1/10 to the 10 to the 124 power. Right, like if you were to pick a state of the universe at random, that's the probability that you would get such a low entropy state. And it's that low entropy that's driving everything else interesting that happens in the universe, right? If you picked an initial starting state at random with almost 100% probability, it would be a state of thermal equilibrium, right? And so like, there's a big mystery as to why we're not in thermal equilibrium right now. Right? Like the universe is constantly moving towards thermal equilibrium, and its prediction of thermodynamics that, a prediction of thermodynamics that we're going to reach thermal equilibrium at some point, and then after that, just stay there. And there will be no life or anything else interesting at all. And so there's a question, why are we not in that state right now? Right. So anyway, so the advocates of the fine-tuning argument say, well, an explanation of this is that there's a creator, like some super powerful being, and that being values life. And so, it adjusted things so that life would be possible. Right. So I think that is a possible explanation.
Okay. And so I guess on your justification for your work on the problem of induction, you talked about the principle of causality. And if you hold that to be true, then for proofs of like a god, whether that be like a deistic god or like a religious god, would you agree with the like uncaused cause argument, like our argument from like a first cause because of the law of causality?
I mean, on the face of it, the law of causality conflicts with the idea of a first cause, right? So, because, the first cause is a thing that itself didn't have a cause. So like, I think that's a violation of the law of causality, like it should have a cause. So like, I think if you believe the law of causality, then you should believe that the causes just stretch back forever. I don't think that there's a good argument against that. Like, I don't know why there can't just be an infinite series of causes going back forever. Right. So like, yeah. So like, I'm not really impressed with the first cause argument for the existence of God.
Okay. So Spec, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, sure. So, do you have a position on abortion, and what are your thoughts on Walter Block's evictionism and Sean Parr's departureism?
I don't know. So I don't know when a fetus becomes a person, right? So like, by the time it's born, I guess it's a person. And, you know, at the moment that the egg cell is fertilized, it's not a person. And at some point it makes the transition. And I don't know what that point is. I would suggest it's probably after it attains consciousness, but I don't know when that is, right? Or, you know, after it first has mental states, but we don't know when that is. But, you know, what makes it difficult is that, well, there's an apparently continuous development. There's not some point at which some radical change suddenly happens in an instant, right? So like, that's why it's hard to put any dividing line. Walter Block's view about this, so what he calls evictionism, he told me about it, you know, when I was in New Orleans for a year. And I think what he doesn't realize is that his position just is the pro-choice position. I think that people in philosophy who are defending the right to an abortion are defending that based on the presupposition that, you know, you can't take the child out and have it still survive. Like, you know, if you pull the child out of the womb, it is going to die. Okay, and so then I asked Walter, wait, so do you have to take the baby out of the womb alive first and then let it die? So you know for certain that it's going to die when you take it out. Do you have to like perform the surgery to take it out first, or can you kill it in order to get it out because you know it's going to die anyway? And he was like, actually, yeah, you can do that. You can kill it in order to get it out, given that you know it's going to die anyway. If it could survive outside the womb, then you have to take it out and let it survive. Okay. So at that point, I said, okay, so you just have the same position as the pro-choice people. This is not like a new position, right? Like, I think he thought this was like a totally new idea, right?
Well,
but, you know, yeah.
Well, would you not like hold a difference in that Block would say that something like abortion would be wrong, as abortion wouldn't be like a gentle, or okay, so the pro-choice position would posit that or some pro-choice positions would posit that even in like the third trimester, even in the second trimester, you still reserve like the right of an abortion. But Block's position would say that because at that position you could evict the fetus non-lethally, and that would be more in accordance with like a standard of gentleness, that you couldn't abort in like a second or third trimester, depending on whether it's viable. But in a pro-choice position, you could.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, let me qualify what I said. So I think there are some extreme pro-choice people who would say, yeah, in the third trimester, you can totally kill the fetus anyway. So let me qualify my previous statement. Block's position is the reasonable, not totally extreme pro-choice position.
Okay.
Right? So like, if you look at Judith Thompson's famous article on this, it's all based on the right to control your own body. And it's actually like, it's a pretty libertarian argument, although it's not labeled that way, right? Mm-hmm. So her view is, you know, the fetus might be a person. Like, she doesn't say whether it is or not, but her view is, if the fetus is a person, you can still kick it out of your body, right? Because, you know, the right to life doesn't entail the right to the use of somebody else's body, mm-hmm. even if you need that to survive. So you can still kick it out, right? But so like, it would not follow from this that you can kill it if it can survive outside your body, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I would consider like, I guess like Block just like a just like libertarian pro-choice, but I guess like rationalized. So what are your arguments for immigration and the case for immigration restriction being a rights violation?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, I think there's a general right against harmful coercion, right? So like using force against another person in a way that harms them. that is typically a rights violation. So meaning that it's wrong unless you have a good reason for it. And it's not justified by producing slightly better consequences. Okay, and why do I think that there is such a right? Well, there's just like lots of examples, right? There's lots of examples of stuff that we consider rights violations, and like a whole bunch of them are harmful coercion. Right. So here's an example. There's a person named Marvin, who's very hungry. So starving Marvin. And he wants to go to a marketplace to buy some food and assume that if nobody interferes with him, his plan will succeed. Like there are people he could get to the marketplace on his own power. There are people there who'd be willing to trade with him. But there's this one character named Sam who stops Marvin in the road, before he can get to the marketplace, and just like forcibly bars the road with his M16 and said, like, I don't want you to go to the marketplace. Right. And the reason Sam does this is that some of his nephews and nieces are going to be trading in the marketplace. And he's afraid that if Marvin gets there, he might bid up the price of food. Right. And thus, compete with Sam's nephews and nieces. Okay. Right. So, did Uncle Sam there act wrongly? So it looks like clearly yes, right? So Marvin then has to return home where he starves. In this story, Sam clearly violated Marvin's rights, right? So like he didn't merely fail to help Marvin, he harmed him, right? If Marvin dies, then Sam will have killed him. Okay, so that's analogous to our Uncle Sam, who is forcibly stopping people from getting to a marketplace where they would be able to trade in order to satisfy their needs.
So would you hold the same standard under something like Hoppianism or some form of covenant community of like restricting immigration based off of like cultural things? Would you still say that would be coercive?
Yeah, you can tell immigrants not to come on your land. So like if you don't want any immigrants in your house, you don't have to have them in there. Also, you can decline to hire them in your business if you have a business, right? But what you can't do is stop other people from letting them on their land, or stop other people from hiring immigrants if they want to. And that's what the anti-immigration people want to do, right? They want to stop the immigrants from having access to anyone, including the other people in the same society who want to trade with the immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. So like, why do the Hoppian anti-immigrant people get to veto anybody else interacting with the immigrants?
Okay. Spec.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that you can't stop other people from interacting with the immigrants if they choose to do so. Like if it's your property, then sure, go ahead, I guess. But you have no right to interfere with other people's interactions, at least in that context.
Yeah, I mean, like imagine so this is the argument I imagine the anti-immigrant people using, right? They're like, well, like there's public land and like they have to cross public lands, use the roads or something. And, so we all have collective ownership of the public property. And so we can collectively vote that immigrants are not allowed to use any public property, which kind of entails that they can't come into the country. Okay, right. So suppose you give that argument. Notice how totally anti-libertarian that argument is, right? Because notice how if that's your argument, that justifies every anti-libertarian policy, right? Because like you can just say, oh, we have democratic control of publicly controlled land, so we can just like attach to the use of public property a condition that, for example, you have to pay your workers $15 an hour or more, right? So you could say, if you don't want to pay the minimum wage, you can't use any public land, which basically means you have to leave the country, right? So like if this argument for excluding immigrants works, it's also a good argument for excluding anyone who doesn't want to obey any rule that the state makes, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Spec, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. So what are you have a lot of work on your criticisms of skeptics. So what would you say your largest contentions are with with skeptics, both like Cartesian skeptics and just skepticism from an ethical perspective?
Yeah, my biggest problem with the skeptics is, I think I know that I have a hand. Like, here's a hand, I know that I have it. And I think that it's, kind of ridiculous if you say that I don't know that. Anyway, so there's a long discussion of how we know things like that, right? So my first book, Skepticism and the Veil of Perception, discusses like how we have perceptual knowledge and such. But basically, the reason you should believe stuff like there's a hand here is, well, it looks like there is, and there's no reason to doubt that. If something appears to you to be the case and you have no reason for doubting it, then you're justified in believing it. So that's my basic view. And I think that is the explanation of basically all rational beliefs, right? So I think if you don't agree with that, then you're going to be in a self-defeating position, right? Because the way that everyone forms their beliefs, including you, when they are pursuing the truth, is on the basis of what seems to them to be the case, right? Including epistemological beliefs, including beliefs about the thing that I'm saying right now, right? The way that people form their beliefs is on the basis of what seems to them to be correct. So is the thing that I just said, does that seem to you to be correct? And that's how you form your belief about it, right? So I think if you conclude that, no, we're not justified in believing what appears to be the case, even when we have no particular reason to doubt it, then you should conclude that you're not justified in believing that, right? Because I don't see any other way that it's going to get to be justified. My problem with moral skeptics is similar, right? I think it seems like it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Just seems wrong. And I have no particular reason for doubting that that's the case, right? So, I think I'm justified in believing that, right? Unless there's some, amazing argument in favor of torturing babies.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that's like applying just intuitionism, I guess ethical intuitionism, to other aspects to critique skepticism, even if you're applying that to something like epistemology for like our Cartesian skeptic. Liam, I think you were gonna ask the question on blackmail next.
Yeah. So do you think under your ethical framework that blackmailing could be compatible with libertarianism, or blackmailing would be ethical or unethical?
It seems wrong, but I wouldn't say it's wrong because of libertarianism or whatever. I would just say it just seems wrong by itself. This is another thing that Walter Block was going on about. Like, he has a book about how blackmail is cool, and also Murray Rothbard was like, "Oh, how could blackmail possibly be bad?" Right? Anyway, just kind of seems bad on its face, right? And so, I think the argument, oh, well, it doesn't violate libertarian principle, therefore it's okay. I think that's like a super lame argument. I think it's just like, oh, well, I guess your libertarian principles are incomplete. Why should I be impressed by that, right? If there's something that seems obviously wrong to almost everyone, and you have this grand sweeping moral principle that doesn't imply that it's wrong, then your principle is just incomplete.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. I guess from an intuitional perspective, and I guess it would make sense if you didn't hold it as like a rights violation or something like that. Because I would agree, right? I wouldn't really consider, I guess, blackmail like a rights violation or something that goes against the NAP. I would just kind of be like, it's kind of not a nice thing to do to people. Doesn't seem very cool. So I guess I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a rights violation, but it is scummy, right?
Yeah. So what is your ontological proof of moral realism?
Oh yeah, good. So, so that title is an allusion to the ontological argument for the existence of God. But so the ontological argument for moral realism is sort of like an argument from the possibility of moral realism to its truth, right? If moral realism might be true, then it is true, okay, which is like what happens in a version of the ontological argument for God. Right, so, okay, so here's the thought. We have some idea of what sorts of things you should do if moral realism is true. Like if moral realism is true, you should avoid hurting babies. That's my favorite example of a moral principle. Don't torture babies, okay. So like, all right, so if moral realism is true, you have a reason to not torture babies. And then here's a general principle. If you know something, if there's something that you would have a reason to do if X were true, then if there's even a chance that X is true, that gives you some reason for doing that thing. A weaker reason, of course, depending on how high the probability is. All right, so an illustration of this is like, okay, suppose that there's a lottery ticket for sale. If I knew that it was the winning ticket, I would have a good reason to buy that lottery ticket. Right, I'd have a good prudential reason. Therefore, if there's a chance that it's the winning ticket, I have a reason to buy it. Obviously, the reason I have for buying it is smaller if the probability is lower, right? But as long as there is some chance that it's the winning ticket, I have some reason for buying it. Okay, obviously I also have a reason for not buying it, which is, it costs $3 or whatever. Okay, you can weigh them against each other. But anyway, if there's a chance of winning and, the winning would give you a benefit, if it was a winning ticket, then you have a reason. Okay, so anyway, so that's how reasons work, right? And the smaller the probability is, the weaker the reason is. All right, so that means that if there's a chance that moral realism is true, then you have some reason for acting in the way that you would act if it was true. All right, okay, now it's hard to say that there's no chance that moral realism is true. Moral realism is actually the majority view among philosophers, right? And so, to say that there's no chance at all of it being true would be a pretty extreme dogmatic position, right? You would have to have like an amazing proof against moral realism, which nobody has. Right, so you should admit, even if you aren't a moral realist yet, you should admit that there's a chance that it's true. So that means that you have some reason for acting the way that you would if moral realism was true. And about this reason that you have for acting that way, what kind of reason is it? When you think about it, you're going to realize that it's a moral reason. Right, so it's a non-self-interested, categorical, practical reason. And that's basically what a moral reason is, right? So, so we get that if moral realism might be true, then it is true, right? Because there's at least one moral reason.
Okay. Spec, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, so in your article, The Case for Tyranny, you lay out an argument based on the premise that free societies have more crime. Since this isn't the case, when people have the liberty to keep and bear arms, crime decreases. Would you consider that an argument for the case for liberty, or would you still hold to the original argument?
Wait, sorry, I missed part of that. What?
So in the article, The Case for Tyranny, you lay out the argument that free societies have more crime, therefore we shouldn't have a free society, right?
Yeah.
But if this wasn't the case, which it isn't, right? When people have the liberty to keep and bear arms, crime decreases. Then would you hold?
Okay, wait. I mean, that is painting with a broad brush there, right? So by the way, it is, so you might be referring to specific laws about, right to bear arms. So like whether you can carry concealed. But like, it doesn't follow that like all liberties are the same, right? And the reason why I'd said that thing was, well, if you looked at the communist countries, they had way lower crime than the United States. Like US has pretty high crime by we have high crime by first world standards, right? For a first world nation, right? We also have more liberty, relatively high liberty by first world standards, except in the economic realm, right? Okay, but what I specifically had in mind in that blog post was as society advances and technology becomes more advanced, it is going to become easier and easier to cause large amounts of destruction with less effort. Because like that's just sort of like the nature of technology. It makes it easier to do more stuff with less effort. But so in particular, if you have a malicious person, they can cause more destruction with less effort. So at some point in the future, there will probably come a time when like one person could, on their own, genetically engineer a deadly virus that would kill millions of people. Right? Conceivably, there could be a time when somebody would have the ability by himself to genetically engineer a virus that would kill everyone. Right? Or create some other incredibly destructive thing, which something that we can't anticipate now because we don't presently have the technology. Right. So, but we know that technology is advancing. So stuff like that will happen. Like, it'll just be possible to do more and more destruction. So like, if you just take the logical extension of it, if you go far enough into the future, there'll be a time when one person can kill everyone. All right. So if we reach that point, we have to have everybody monitored at all times, because there is at least one person in the world who wants to kill everyone. That's probably going to continue to be the case. I know, like, there are some people who would like to kill all the Jews right now. And there's some people who would like to kill all Americans right now, right? And I bet there's some people who would like to actually literally kill every human being, right? So anyway, so like, right, but that, that's like a relatively specific thing, right? Like, we have to monitor people for whether they're accessing this destructive technology. The title, like The Case for Tyranny, is a little bit, I don't know, like, I sort of like made it more provocative, right? And some people said in the comments, this doesn't really sound like tyranny per se, right? It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, it's sort of like a case for why people have to be monitored, like why we have to not have complete privacy rights in the future, when we have advanced technology. But that doesn't mean like, oh, the government should be restricting everything all the time, right?
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that appeal, especially with like automation and stuff, and like the like growing threat of like, if we allow more freedom, then like there's obviously an increased possibility of people doing worse things, as they can have like easier access to things that are eventually getting like worse or possibly worse for us. So I guess last question would be, what are your thoughts on strategies towards a freer society? For example, things like counter economics or some form of policy preference.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's good that people are trying many different strategies. My own thing is sort of trying to change people's philosophical beliefs. So I don't know that this is the best thing to do, but I think it's the best thing for me to do because, I'm a skilled philosopher. Maybe other people should do other things. But my thought is, the values that people hold in society have an effect on just like how everything else runs in the society. So like the reason why we're not doing slavery anymore is basically that people decided that it was wrong, right? It was unjust. Okay, and I know that that's why it collapsed, and not for some other like Marxist type reason, like it wasn't because it wasn't an efficient method of production or whatever, because actually it was profitable for the slave owners. And I know that it was abolished because we thought that it was wrong, because like we have records of that time, like we have records of these abolitionists explaining very explicitly why they wanted to abolish slavery, right? And it was all moral arguments, right? So anyway, so my thought is, moral arguments have an effect on society. If we could change the values of society, then the rest of society would change. And they do change over time. Like there've been big changes in people's values and philosophical beliefs over time, right? So what I'm trying to do is sort of like push the philosophical beliefs. In particular, I want to convince people that the government isn't really special, right? Like there's no reason why these 535 people in Washington should tell everybody else what to do. There's no reason why they should be exempt from respecting the rights of everyone else. Everyone else has to respect other people's rights. those people should have to respect our rights too.
Okay, sorry, so the last one's gonna be the last
Yeah,
question, but I
Mustafa asked a
got one
question
more.
in chat. So
Yep,
he
that's fine.
asked, what theory of truth do you subscribe to?
I mean, the correspondence theory of truth is like the only theory that has a prayer, like the only thing that makes sense, right? What is it for something to be true? So, if you say the sky is blue and the sky is blue, that's true, right? I learned that from Aristotle, right? To say of what is that it is true, and to say of what is that it is not is false.
Yeah, okay,
I think
great.
that's everything.
Thank you, Professor Huemer. I think that was really good. I think a lot of definitely interesting perspectives that differ from Block's, which is interesting. Kind of like what Block said. Block said that libertarianism isn't like a cult like objectivism. There's like a lot of different like interpretations or ideals in like the libertarian like talking space. But
Yeah, I think some
yeah,
people are going to be upset by that, characterizing
uh,
objectivism as a cult there.
what? It's okay. He had to listen to Block say it. It's okay. But